Hello and welcome to quiz class. Today we have 100 questions on the beloved 1960s music. So let's begin with question number 1. Which musical soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1960? The Sound of Music, The Producers, or Fiddler on the Roof? The Sound of Music. In which country did U.S. music producer Shel Talmy predominantly work in the 1960s? The UK, the US, or France? The UK. Which country artist popularized Bob Ferguson's 1958 song Wings of a Dove in 1960? Waylon Jennings, Hank Thompson, or Ferlin Husk? Ferlin Husk. Which 1960s hit lead singer was sometimes called the bad girl of rock and roll? Ronnie Spector, Janis Joplin, or Peggy March? Ronnie Spector. Which prog rock act released the 1969 album In the Court of the Crimson King? The Crimsons, Crimson Court, or Crimson King? Crimson King. What is the full theme name of John Barry's 1963 composition used in From Russia with Love? 007 Takes the Lecter, 007 Takes the Revolver, or Takes the Spectre? Takes the Lecter. In which city was Jerry Lee Lewis's 1964 concert at the Star Club? Frankfurt, Munich, or Hamburg? Hamburg. What genre was composer Terry Riley's 1969 album A Rainbow in Curved Air? Electronic, classical, or jazz? Electronic. Which musician appeared in the 1969 film The Virgin Soldiers? Elton John, Billy Furry, or David Bowie? David Bowie. What product was advertised using the Brass Rings 1967 song The Disadvantages of You? Beer, cigarettes, or girdles? Cigarettes. Which Broadway production soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1961? Camelot, Bye Bye Birdie, or Carnival? Camelot. Which city's 1960s music club scene was the Village? Los Angeles, Nashville, or New York City? New York City. Which band reformed and changed their name to Steppenwolf in 1967? The Sparrows, the Squirrels, or the Salmons? The Sparrows. Which artist originally released Chubby Checker's 1961 hit, Pony Time? Good and Bad, The Good Timers, or Times Bad? The Good Timers. What does the title of France Gall's 1967 song Les Sauchettes translate to? Sausages, lollipops, or spirits? Lollipops. Which artist was born Paul David Hewson on May 10, 1960? Prince, Bono, or Sting? Bono. Which Meredith Willson Broadway musical was adapted to film in 1962? The Music Family, The Music Man, or The Music Children? The Music Man. Which 1960s act is not an example of garage or proto-punk? The Kinks, MC5, or The Saints? The Saints. Which hip-hop pioneer moved to the Bronx in the late 60s from Jamaica? Bob Marley, Ice-T, or Kool Herc? Kool Herc. What did John Lennon say the Beatles had become bigger than in 1966? Queen Elizabeth II, John F. Kennedy, or Jesus? Jesus. Which movie soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1962? My Fair Lady, West Side Story, or Cinderella? West Side Story. Which folk singer-songwriter wrote the 1969 Midnight Cowboy hit Everybody's Talking? Paul McCartney, Harry Nilsson, or Fred Neil? Fred Neil. What is the 1962 comedy musical film Don't Knock the Twist a sequel to? Twist Around the Clock, Don't Knock the Rock, or Rock Around the Clock? Twist Around the Clock. What is the complete title of the Delphonics' 1968 song, La La? La, land, means I love you. Means I love you. Which artist did not cover and release Dedicated to the One I Love in the 1960s? The Shirelles, Biddy McLean, or the Mamas and the Papas? Biddy McLean. What type of cancer did Nat King Cole die from on February 15, 1965? Lung, brain, or skin? Lung. Who was fired from the Temptations in 1968? Dennis Edwards, Otis Williams, or David Ruffin? David Ruffin. Which artist wrote the 1963 protest song Only a Pawn in Their Game about the assassination of civil rights activist Medgar Evers? Marvin Gaye, Leonard Cohen, or Bob Dylan? Bob Dylan. What brand used the 1965 Herbie Hancock jazz composition Made in Voyage for a commercial? Fabergé, Tiffany, or Swarovski? Fabergé. Which Glenn Campbell album won the 1969 Grammy Award for Album of the Year? By the Time I Get to Phoenix, By the Time I Get to Vegas, or By the Time I Get to Tampa? By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Which movie soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1963? West Side Story, Gigi, or The Sound of Music? West Side Story. Which rock group founded in the 1960s was managed by Andrew Long Oldham? The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, or Deep Purple? The Rolling Stones. Which song is not a Leona Williams single from 1968? Mama, I've Gotta Go to Memphis, Papa's Medicine Show, or A Woman's Man? Mama, I've Gotta Go to Memphis. What instrument was used for a rock sound on the 1969 High Tide album Sea Shanties? Violin, banjo, or tambourine? Violin. How old was Leslie Gore when she recorded her 1963 #1 hit, It's My Party? 16, 18, or 20? '16. Which television series, starting in 1964, originally used Frank Sinatra's song as its theme? Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, or The Addams Family? Bewitched. What type of show was Velvet Underground and Miko's 1966 and 67 exhibition? Guest DJ, multimedia, or festival? Multimedia. What is the full title of Wendy Carlos's 1968 electronic album, Switched On? Beats, Babes, or Bach? Bach. Which singer-actor got her start as an usher at the Lunt Fontaine Theater for the Sound of Music musical in 1960? Barbara Streisand, Blythe Danner, or Bette Midler? Barbara Streisand. Which country's song Watching the Sky and Thinking a Thought was one of the first sung in space in 1963? The Ukraine, Poland, or Georgia? The Ukraine. Which musical soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1964? Hello, Dolly, Meet the Beatles, or The Singing Nun? Hello, Dolly. Which band was in residence at the Whiskey A Go-Go Club during the summer of 1966? The Yardbirds, The Doors, or the Beach Boys? The Doors. Who did the Magic Band support from 1967 onwards? Captain Beefheart, Beefeater, or Beefcake? Captain Beefheart. Which 1960s singer-songwriter got her start at the Depression Coffee House? Judy Collins, Carole King, or Joni Mitchell? Joni Mitchell. What was the U.S. market name for the Japanese song Ue o Mueto Aruko when it became a hit in 1963? Sukiyaki, Sumo, or Samurai? Sukiyaki. In which U.S. state was singer-songwriter Garth Brooks born on February 7, 1962? Texas, Oklahoma, or Montana? Oklahoma. In which country was the original screenplay for the 1969 musical film Sweet Charity set? Spain, Italy, or Greece? Italy. What band started as the Pox in 1967? New York Dolls, Dead Boys, or the Heartbreakers? New York Dolls. Before becoming a go-go DJ in 1969, what did Patty Brockhurst do? Dancer, bartender, or cigarette girl? Cigarette girl. Question 50. Which criminals did Beach Boys member Dennis Wilson become friends with in 1968? The Manson family, Cosa Nostra, or Hell's Angels? The Manson family. Which movie soundtrack was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1965? Mary Poppins, Help, or Your Cheatin' Heart? Mary Poppins. How many ensemble members were used to form the folk group the New Christy Minstrels from 1961 to 1962? 8, 11, or 14? 14. Which 1962 film was adapted from Playhouse 90 and awarded the Best Song Academy Award for its title song? Stories from Playhouse 90, Days of Wine and Roses, or Town Without Pity? Days of Wine and Roses. What was the original title of the Tokens' 1961 cover, The Lion Sleeps Tonight? Mbube, Wimowe, or The Lion Sleeps Tonight? Mbube. How did singer-songwriter Otis Redding die on December 10, 1967? Shooting murder, plane crash, or cardiac arrest? A plane crash. In which film did Art Garfunkel begin filming a role in 1969? Catch-22, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or Good Morning Vietnam? Catch-22. What was the initial inspiration for the 1966 Buffalo Springfield song For What It's Worth? Civil rights movements, Sunset Strip curfew riots, or anti-Vietnam War protests? Sunset Strip curfew riots? What genre of music was Indigo Records when founded in 1960? Pop, folk, or rock? Pop. Which jazz artist released the 1968 album Fille de Kilimanjaro? Sun Ra, Etta James, or Miles Davis? Miles Davis. Which singer won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist for 1965? Tom Jones, Rod Stewart, or Neil Diamond? Tom Jones. Which artist's album, Whipped Cream and Other Delights, was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1966? Baja Marimba Band, Herb Alpert's Tijuana Brass, or The Wrecking Crew? Herb Alpert's Tijuana Brass. How many #1 albums did Merle Haggard and the Strangers have between 1966 and 1969? 0, 2, or 4? 4. Which English rock band formed in 1963 and named themselves after a Bo Diddley song? Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, or Pretty Things? Pretty Things. Which singer heard the Exciters tell him in 1962 and was inspired to pursue a pop soul career? Cilla Black, Dusty Springfield, or Norma Tanega? Dusty Springfield. Who was the first musical act to perform live on Top of the Pops in the 1960s? The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or Cream? The Rolling Stones. Which 1964 television series used the melody La Romance de Paris as its theme music? Mr. Ed, Green Acres, or Flipper? Flipper. Which artist's second studio album, Electronic Sound, was released in 1969? Brian Eno, George Harrison, or Phil Collins? George Harrison. Which television show did singer-songwriter Johnny Cash not guest star on in the 60s? MASH, The Rebel, or The Deputy? MASH. Which clothing brand was asked to drop the Creedence Clearwater Revival song Fortunate Son from their advertising in the 60s? Wrangler, Levi's, or Lee? Wrangler. What instrument was not available to make the 1960s Doctor Who theme? The synthesizer, the electric piano, or the slide guitar? The synthesizer. Which of the Monkees' records was the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1967? The Best of the Monkees, More of the Monkees, or The Monkees? More of the Monkees. What type of music was played at the 1960s club Pandora's Box at 8118 Sunset? Psychedelic rock and roll, prog rock and roll, or R&B? Psychedelic rock and roll. Which 1960s artist has been called Canada's greatest songwriter? Gordon Lightfoot, Neil Young, or Paul Anka? Gordon Lightfoot. Which artist made the song Wooden Heart a US #1 hit in 1961 before Elvis Presley? Joe Dowell, Mark Dining, or Fred Wise? Joe Dowell. Which singer was asked to perform at Martin Luther King's memorial in the 60s? Nina Simone, Tina Turner, or Aretha Franklin? Aretha Franklin. What type of piece is the 1963 theme music for Charade by Harry Mancini? Waltz, lament, or march? Waltz. What music genre did Little Richard attempt to tour in 1962? Gospel, rock and roll, or doo-wop? Gospel. Which hip-hop artist was the late 1960s gang Street Black Spades affiliated with? Africa Bambaataa, Clifton Jiggs Chase, or Big Bank Hank? Africa Bambaataa. What was Bob Dylan called by a crowd in 1965 when he played an electric guitar? Satan, Judas, or Stalin? Judas. Where did the Baroque pop band The Left Bank form in 1965? London, New York City, or Paris? New York City. Question 81. Albums from which artist had the most overall weeks at the Billboard 200 #1 album of 1968? The Beatles, The Doors, or Simon and Garfunkel? Simon and Garfunkel. Which folk duo had a Canadian #1 in 1965 with the song Early Morning Rain? John and Sharon, Ken and Simone, or Ian and Sylvia? Ian and Sylvia. For which film was the song The Shadow of Your Smile awarded the 1965 Academy Award for Best Original Song? The Sandpiper, The Shoemaker, or The Shadows? The Sandpiper. What was Bakersfield sound a subgenre of in the 1960s? Country, pop, or soul? Country. What was 1960s artist Brenda Lee nicknamed? Little Miss Sunshine, Little Miss Dynamite, or Little Miss Tornado? Little Miss Dynamite. Which artist didn't record All Along the Watchtower in the 1960s? Bob Dylan, Billy Preston or Jimi Hendrix? Billy Preston. While ill in the late 1960s, whose ghost did producer Joe Meek believe was haunting him? Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, or Patsy Cline? Buddy Holly. In which year did the Beatles stop touring? 1964, 1966, or 1968? 1966. Which band was offered the song Eve of Destruction in the mid-1960s but never recorded it? The Byrds, the Turtles, or the Monkees? The Byrds. What is the 1960 jazz song Corcovado known as in English? All Quiet, All Peaceful, Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars, or Quiet Loving Heart? Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars. Which musical soundtrack recording was a Billboard 200 #1 album for 13 weeks in 1969? Hair, Zorba, or Lute? Hair. What was the singer Little Eva's connection to Carole King and Jerry Goffin before recording The Locomotion? Babysitter, co-writer, or tutor? Babysitter. Which band did Swedish singer Jerry Williams join in 1962? Swedish Fish, House Mafia, or The Violence? The Violence. What type of instrument was the 1963 mellotron? Keys, strings, or percussion? Keys. Which artist visited Vietnam in 1966 to perform and develop a feature film? Bob Hope, Sammy Davis Jr., or John Wayne? John Wayne. Which 1961 children's song was inspired by a nursery rhyme? Sugar, Sugar, the Archies, Yaya Lee Dorsey, or Barefootin' Robert Parker? Yaya Lee Dorsey. What instrument was used to set off explosives at the end of the Who's performance on Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in 1967? Keyboard, drum kit, or guitar? Drum kit. Which song was revived in 1965 and then held the record for fastest selling song in history? I'm Henrith VIII, I Am, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, or Color Him Father? I'm Henry VIII, I Am. What was the musical Thoroughly Modern Millie awarded at the 1967 Academy Awards? Best Original Score, Best Song, or Best Original Song Score or Adaptation Score? Best Original Score. What did the 1960s creatively mark for artists? the single era, the EP era, or the album era? The album era. And our bonus question, what 1967 hit spells out the title name and says, "Find out what it means to me"? Let us know the answer in the comments, and of course, how you did. Thanks for playing this quiz. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.